been stealing you back to the best era. Your time machine to childhood is here. Today, we're unboxing forgotten memories that'll make you smile, sigh, or scream, "I remember that." Smash like to time travel subscribe for weekly throwbacks. Comment which memory hits hardest. Ready? Let's rewind fast. Step into the dusty corridors of yesteryear, where walls whispered and floors held secrets. Homes from decades past weren't just places to live, they were living machines of invention, packed with quirks and features that now seem downright bizarre. These old architectural oddities once served real purposes, clever solutions for their time. But today, they sit quietly beneath layers of renovation, or worse, completely forgotten. We're diving headfirst into the peculiar, the practical, and the flat-out weird things people used to build into their houses. Some of these features will have you nodding in recognition. Others might leave you asking, what on earth were they thinking? Let's kick it off with a groovy relic from the post-war boom, the Newtone intercom and music system. Back in the 50s and 60s, this was the gadget for the modern home. Imagine walls wired up with tiny speakers and a control panel smack in the kitchen. Families could turn on the radio, page someone in another room, or yell, "Dinner's ready," without actually yelling. It felt futuristic, like you were living in the Jetsons. Parents could summon kids from the basement, and if you were lucky, you had one in the bathroom for mid-shower tunes. But fast forward to today, and these built-ins are usually covered with paint, stuffed behind drywall, or silently rusting in basements, abandoned like old robots after the space race. Now take a stroll to the rooftops of old New England homes, and you might spot something oddly poetic: the Widow's Walk. This small, railed platform atop coastal homes has a haunting history. Back when sailors ruled the seas, their wives would stand up there scanning the horizon, praying for a glimpse of their husband's returning ship. Too often, they never came home. The walk became a symbol of mourning, thus the name Widow's Walk. Beyond the legend, it also gave practical roof access for chimney repairs, but it's the heartache etched into the design that makes it unforgettable. It's part architecture, part love story, and a little ghost story too. Ever been in an old Victorian mansion and found a mysterious button in the floorboards? That's the long-lost call bell system. In posh homes of the 1800s, these buttons would ring a bell in the kitchen to summon the maid or butler. Sometimes the system included an indicator panel, so the servant knew exactly which room was calling. Think of it like an analog version of texting, if texting required a wire network and a small brass bell. It was high-tech for the time and a badge of luxury. But most have vanished beneath flooring or been ripped out in renovations, leaving only tails and maybe a few random wires for curious new homeowners to puzzle over. And don't even get me started on the Rumford fireplace. These tall, narrow hearths were designed in the 1700s by Count Rumford, an American-born inventor and physicist with a flair for heat. The genius? Angled sides that reflected more warmth into the room while burning less wood. For early American homes, this was like upgrading from a flip phone to a smartphone. But as central heating took over, the Rumford quietly disappeared from blueprints. Still, if you find one in an old colonial, take a moment to appreciate the blend of science and style that kept entire families toasty through brutal winters. And here's one you probably never noticed, even if you grew up with it. Look at the corner where stairs meet the wall in some pre-war homes, and you might find a tiny triangular piece of metal. That's a stair dust corner, also known as a dust stop. It wasn't just decorative, it was a brilliant little invention meant to keep dust and dirt from collecting in hard-to-sweep corners. It made cleaning faster and easier, especially when sweeping with those old-fashioned straw brooms. A humble detail, often missed, but a smart bit of design lost to time. Today, we just vacuum around it and forget the clever tricks of the past. Up. Ready to rewind even further? Let's keep digging through the cozy clutter of the past, where every creak in the floor had a story, and every strange little detail in the house served a charming and sometimes totally baffling purpose. Today's homes might be all slick lines and smart tech, but they just don't breathe the way old houses did. Let's take a candlelit walk through some more long-lost house features that were once considered essentials, features you'll rarely, if ever, see in today's cookie-cutter homes. Let's start with something so simple, it's almost poetic: the milk door. If your grandparents grew up in a home built before the 1960s, there's a chance the kitchen still has a tiny square door built into the wall, just big enough for 2 glass bottles. These were used by milkmen, who'd swing by before sunrise, collecting yesterday's empties and dropping off fresh milk, cream, or butter without even knocking. You didn't need to be home, and the milk stayed cool in that tiny in-between space, protected from weather and nosy pets. It was a silent, magical exchange that built trust between neighbors and local vendors. Today, that door is either sealed shut, hidden behind drywall, or mistaken by kids as a weird old cabinet. But back then, it was the heart of the morning routine. Now let's stroll down to the basement, where you might find something even stranger: a small windowless room with charred walls and a sloped concrete floor leading to a drain. That, my friend, is the remains of a coal room. Before gas furnaces, homes were heated by coal dropped through an outside chute into this room. The coal man would arrive in his dusty truck, tip his chute through a tiny hatch, and pour the black gold straight into your storage room. You could almost hear the thunderous clatter as it tumbled in. Kids would peek through the cracks and marvel at the black avalanche, while Mom grumbled about the soot it left behind. It was dirty, dangerous, and essential. These rooms are now often storage closets, wine cellars, or just eerily empty, still stained by a time when heating your home took muscle and mess. Next up is something a bit fancier: the built-in telephone niche. Picture it: a graceful little arched cutout in the hallway wall, sometimes with a tiny shelf and even a cubby for a phone book. Phones weren't mobile, and they weren't pocket-sized. They were heavy, corded, and sacred, so they had their own little throne in the house. Families would gather near it, whispering, "It's long distance," as though it were a royal announcement. Teenagers would stretch that cord down the hall to hide their giggles and secrets. It was the social hub of the house, and the niche made it feel official. These days, with smartphones in our palms and voice assistants in the air, we've lost the romance of that designated phone spot. Let's walk upstairs for a moment and peek into the linen closet. If you're in a really old house, you might see slatted wooden shelves with vents and holes cut into the back. That wasn't a design flaw. It was a warming closet. Heat would rise through vents behind the wall, usually from a furnace or hot water pipe, keeping towels and sheets toasty warm. In the dead of winter, wrapping yourself in a warm towel after a bath wasn't luxury, it was survival. Families prized these little corners of comfort, especially before electric blankets or space heaters came along. Today, that clever passive heating system has mostly vanished, replaced by closed-in closets with no cozy warmth. And then there's the transom window, a small horizontal window above doors, especially in hallways or bedrooms. These weren't just for looks. Before air conditioning, transoms allowed hot air to escape upward, pulling cool air through the home in a gentle natural draft. They could be propped open with a little latch or rod, letting the breeze do the work. Summer nights were bearable because of them. You could lie in bed and feel the evening air drift in from the hallway, carrying the smell of honeysuckle or distant rain. Many of these have been painted shut or removed altogether as modern HVAC systems took over. But if you ever stay in an old inn or a farmhouse and see one still in use, take a moment to admire that clever simplicity. These features weren't smart by today's standards, but they were thoughtful. They served people in quiet ways, blending form with function. And they added character, something modern builds often lack. You didn't need apps or screens to feel connected. A warm towel rack, a talking tube, or a tiny milk door was enough to make a house feel alive. But we're not done yet, because the past keeps whispering through the floorboards and rattling the old glass window panes, reminding us just how different home used to feel. Let's head back outside for a moment, just beyond the back porch, where the grass grew high and kids chased fireflies with jars. Because behind every well-loved 1900s home, you'd often find one strange little structure, the root cellar. No, it wasn't a storm shelter or a spooky dungeon, though it sure looked like one. Root cellars were the original refrigerators. Built into the earth and lined with stone, these cool, damp hideaways preserved potatoes, onions, apples, and preserves all year long. Families stored canned jams, pickled beets, and sacks of root vegetables in those underground caves where the temperature stayed low naturally. Sometimes the door was a creaky old wooden hatch built into a hillside. Other times it was a concrete slab that opened with a rusted iron handle. In the heat of July, you'd sneak down barefoot just to stand in the cold dirt and feel that musty chill on your face. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked, and many of those cellars still exist, tucked beneath forgotten trapdoors, quietly holding the ghosts of meals gone by. Now walk back into the house and pause by the living room wall. Notice that strange, rectangular brass fixture near the floor? That's no decoration. That's a floor button light switch, sometimes known as a toe switch. Back in the early electric days, when wiring was still a novelty and hands were often full with babies or baskets, someone got clever and invented a switch you could step on. A gentle click of your toe could turn on the ceiling light or activate a hall lamp. It sounds like something from a steampunk novel, but it was real and shockingly practical. Today, we have smart bulbs and voice-activated lighting, but back then, your foot did the trick. Let's drift down the hallway now and open a door that once led to one of the most misunderstood rooms of all, the parlor. Not the living room, not a den, this was the parlor. It was where families hosted guests, displayed their nicest furnishings, and kept the piano in tune. It was also often the coldest, quietest room in the house, because it wasn't used unless there was company. The parlor was for show and ceremony. A wedding photo hung above the fireplace. Lace doilies decorated every armrest, and in many cases, this was also the room used for wakes or formal goodbyes when someone passed away at home. That gave it an almost spiritual stillness. It's why some folks still refer to funeral homes as funeral parlors. That's where the term comes from. Today, the parlor has vanished, absorbed into the more casual and chaotic living room. But in the 1900s, it held a solemn elegance that can't be recreated with modern furniture. Now, let's talk about something everyone remembers, even if they never knew what it was called: picture rails. These were narrow wooden moldings that ran just below the ceiling, around the top perimeter of a room. Before drywall and wall anchors, you couldn't just hammer a nail into plaster. You needed a picture rail, designed specifically so you could hang artwork using hooks and cords without damaging the wall. The pictures would dangle a bit, tilted forward with charm, their cords often visible, adding to the texture of the room. Grandma's wedding portrait? Hung from a rail. That old still life painting of apples and wine? Yeah, picture rail. And sometimes, you'd see a whole gallery of family photos lined up just beneath the crown molding, like a timeline of smiles and hairstyles. Today, these rails are mostly ripped out during renovations or mistaken as outdated trim. But to the trained eye, they're a clue that this house once wore its memories proudly. Now wander into the kitchen, the true heart of the home. You'll see that old Hoosier cabinet, standing tall like a reliable old friend. This was the kitchen command center before built-in cabinetry became common. It had everything: a flour sifter, spice racks, sliding shelves, even a tin countertop that made cleanup a breeze. Housewives in aprons bustled around them, pulling out sugar bins and storing their favorite recipe cards in secret drawers. Kids sat at the lower shelves, sneaking molasses cookies and watching the dough rise. The Hoosier wasn't just furniture. It was survival, invention, and charm all packed into one oak-framed marvel. Today, they're prized as vintage collectibles, often refinished and repurposed as coffee bars or baking stations. But when you see one, know that it once held generations of mealtime memories. And finally, before we close the door on today's trip down memory lane, peer closely at the walls. You might just spot a push-button light switch, a tiny, round button set into a ceramic plate with a satisfying click when pressed. These switches are making a comeback among retro home enthusiasts, but in their heyday, they were cutting edge. With two buttons, one for on, one for off, they looked like something from a silent film detective's office. They were elegant, simple, and endlessly tactile. No plastic, no buzzing dimmer switches, just a solid click that said, "The light is on." Smash that like if this brought you back in time. Comment below with the one thing you remember most from childhood homes. Subscribe to ride the memory train every single week. And until next time, keep the light on, keep the radio playing, and never stop remembering.